Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jennifer Nadel, Chair of the Global Compassion Coalition, the movement to put compassion at the heart of society. And you are watching our monthly deep dive into the world of compassion and change-making. This month, in honor of International Women's Day, I'm super excited to be speaking to an extraordinary leader, Kristin Rowe-Finkbeiner. Kristin is the co-founder and executive director of Mums Rising, a million-plus strong movement for equity. She's also the author of The F Word, Feminism in Jeopardy, and host of the radio show Breaking Through. Kristin, I can't think of anyone I'd rather be celebrating International Women's Day with. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here.
Oh, such a pleasure. So can I start by asking you a bit about your individual journey? How did it all start? Could you have guessed that this is where you would have been heading from your childhood?
I never would have guessed that this is where I would be today. And I just want to say that it's not an I that's here today. It's a we that's here today. I'm really blessed to be able to work for many years, decades even, with so many other leaders side by side, step by step, as co-conspirators for change. And so the reason why Moms Rising is so powerful is because a handful of people came together, and that handful of people became another handful of people, and another handful of people added to more handfuls of people. And all of a sudden, handfuls and handfuls and handfuls actually add up to be over 1 million members. So it's a lot of people together that brought us to this moment where Moms Rising has 1 million members.
I totally get that. But as you're here, can you just try and unpick how that happens? Because it's such an incredible thing. And I totally get that you're one of many and that we're all one of many, and that this movement for rights is a we movement. But how did it come about? Can you tell us the story of how you and a group of mums suddenly became this million strong plus movement?
Yes, like many parents, we all have our own story. And my story starts with my mom and my grandparents, and, goes back in time where actually my great grandma was really active in women's rights and making sure people had access to birth control and to decide if, when, and how many children they would have. And she was incredibly active. And my grandmother, who passed away last year, just 9 days shy of her 106th birthday, actually followed her in that engagement in women's rights and equity and equality for all people. And right before my grandmother passed away, again, she's 105 years old, about a month before she passed away, she called me up and she said, "Kristin, I'm seeing what's happening in the news, and I want to tell you, don't give up. So many people came before we are now, multiple generations, and multiple generations are counting on this generation to keep going." So my push came, starting through my great grandma and my grandma, and then my mom was also active as in feminist sort of agency circles, and my dad was active in civil rights circles. And so then I came along, and I was brought up with an idea of civic engagement, and I was working in the environmental movement. And as I was working in the environmental movement, all of a sudden I was pregnant. And so I said, "Oh my goodness, this is interesting. Yay, I got married, had a baby, and I lost my job." So like hundreds of thousands of people, because the United States of America does not have any paid family medical leave. We're one of only 6 countries in the world that doesn't have any paid family medical leave after a new baby arrives, or that you can take if a serious health crisis strikes, or if a parent is on their last breath and you need to be there with them. Because I joined that sort of parade of people in that moment of being pushed out of the labor force because I didn't have paid family medical leave, I picked up the phone and did what any person does in this situation. I called the US Census. Now, most people do not do this. But I had been working in environmental politics and policy for a long time. And I was like, this is pretty isolating. I thought that, all of our moms, grandmas, great grandmas took care of this issue where we're just not equal. And I didn't realize it was such a big deal. So being a mom is a greater predictor of wage and hiring discrimination than gender. And moms of color, because of structural racism, end up earning as low as 46 cents to a white dad's dollar for Latina moms and 52 cents to a white dad's dollar for Black moms. It's ridiculous. We have intersectional racism and sexism and familial discrimination happening in America right now. And so I called the US Census because I was like, in this moment, I didn't know that yet, that being a mom was a greater predictor of wage and hiring discrimination than gender. But in that moment, I was like, what's going on? I feel isolated. I've been pushed out of my work. I have an infant who at that time was really sick. He had an IgA deficiency. So it also meant that he couldn't be in childcare. And, what are people doing? So I was like, how many people like me are there out there on the phone to the US Census? And the US Census said, we don't know because we're not tracking unremunerated or unpaid labor. We can kind of tell in the shadow of a married spouse. So that left out like a bazillion people, because if you were at that time in a same-sex partnership, or if you're a single parent and you'd been pushed out of the labor force, you wouldn't show up at all, just totally invisible. And the US Census is used for things like, where do you put grocery stores? Where do you put bus stops? Where do you, put community investments? And so it's just making this giant invisibilization, I made up a word, of the unpaid work of parenting and of moms in particular, even a bigger deal by just erasing it entirely. So at that point, I started writing articles. I felt like Alice in Wonderland had fallen down like the little hole. I was like, wait, I didn't think it was this bad. But yes, in fact, it is this bad. Childcare costs more than college. So if you're pushed out of the labor force and because you don't have paid family medical leave, then it's very hard to get back into the labor force because childcare costs more than college. Where are you going to get that money if you've been pushed out of the labor force? Like there's a whole domino effect that happens in America. So I started researching it and pulling on the strings like a data detective to say, like, what is happening in America? And, why aren't we talking about it? So I did write that book, The F Word, Feminism in Jeopardy. There's one chapter in there on mothering that's very strong on mothering. And Joan Blades, who's the co-founder of Move On, with her partner, actually called me up and was like, Kristin, oh my gosh, I read this. I had no idea. Let's co-write another thing. So we co-wrote the Motherhood Manifesto, which is another book. And that book was made into a documentary film. And then we decided, I had a lot of experience in environmental policy and politics, and she had a lot of experience with Move On. And we decided that the next step was to work for change. So we should contribute the funds someplace from the book and the movie to an organization. So we met with 6 organizations and said, who's doing this? We want to contribute the funds. And the 6 said, no one's doing this, opening avenues for moms to be heard. And then the 6 became 12, 12 became 48. We eventually started doing surveys, and with the blessing of more than 50 organizations, Joan and I and others launched Moms Rising to be a place where, we could open avenues for busy parents to be heard on the issues that matter the most to them. So it's a long journey, but it's not a journey that is really unique, sadly. When we look at what's happening in our country with parenting, a tremendous amount of people are pushed out of the labor force and have that wake up moment right at the busiest time in their life when they're trying to juggle work and raising a child. And it was to fill that need that we started Moms Rising.
Absolutely. And I'm sitting here in London where we have maternity rights, where it's recognized. We know from psychology that those early weeks and months of the baby bonding with the primary caregiver are so important for psychological development, for health going on through the rest of your life. And yet America, the most developed so-called country in the world, doesn't have any real maternity rights. I mean, how do you account for that huge absence?
I mean, it is hard to account for. There are really no excuses, but we live in a culture of rugged individualism in the United States of America. We have worked and passed paid family medical leave in several states and jurisdictions, 10, but that's not everybody. And so you shouldn't have to win the state lottery or the boss lottery to have access to this policy. And still we have about, 80% of low wage workers don't have access to this policy. So it's a pretty big deficit in terms of what it's going to take. We know now that polling of Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, all people across the political spectrum overwhelmingly support these policies. And so it's no longer a question of if, but when these policies will finally pass. And we need to make the when sooner because it's an urgent crisis. We came very close to passing within the last year care infrastructure, which is what we really need, is not one policy, but multiple policies.
Yeah, can you talk through that? Because obviously mums' rights are integrated with a whole network of rights and inequities that need addressing. So talk us through that care package that you're fighting for.
Yes. So we like to say, just like you need to build bridges and roads to drive on to go to work, we need a care infrastructure so parents can go to work, so kids can thrive, so care workers can earn living wages, and so our economy and our businesses can be boosted. And so what's in that? That's the best question on the planet. Paid family medical leave, no matter where you live or work, is in that. Access to affordable childcare and pre-K that's high quality is absolutely essential. Elder care is also essential. Many moms and parents are also caring for people who are in the older generation as they're raising their own children. Super important. In addition, we want fair pay for everyone, and in particular for care workers. Care workers in the United States of America are some of the lowest paid workers, and that's absolutely not okay. We want—
And they tend, of course, to be women. No surprise.
Yes, we want fair treatment of all immigrant families and a path to citizenship. A high level of care workers are from immigrant families and are treated doubly unfairly because of that. And so we want to make sure that there's fair pay and fair immigration policies. And we also want a continuation of the expanded child tax credit checks, which are really based on how many kids you have. It's a amount of money that you would get each month to help pay for that childcare, to help pay for the necessities. So here's the thing. When we pass all of those policies, studies show, in particular, if we pass paid family medical leave, affordable childcare, and access to equitable healthcare, which I didn't mention yet, but we have unequitable healthcare in the United States of America. We're one of the only World Health Organizations, well, we are the only World Health Organization that has maternal morbidity or people dying in childbirth going up instead of down. And Black women are 3 to 4 times as likely to die in childbirth as white women. That is not okay. So with this, we need access to equitable healthcare as well. So going back to studies show that when you have access to paid family medical leave, equitable healthcare, affordable childcare, and the other policies that we mentioned, you actually lower the wage gap between moms and non-moms, and thus between women and men. And that raises all boats. And studies show that if we addressed pay parity, got rid of pay discrepancies, that we would get 50% of children in America out of poverty, and we would raise the GDP by at least 5%. That's a big deal because women and moms make the majority of consumer purchasing decisions. An economy where 72% of our GDP is based on our consumer purchasing decisions. So if we're not being paid fairly, if we don't have funds to spend, then those stores that make the sneakers, the stores where we could buy our salads, all of the community around us also loses out when we're losing out. So the beautiful thing about these policies is there's rooms full of data about how they don't just help moms, they also help businesses with retention and addressing supply chain issues, which when you have rapid turnover, you can get supply chain issues, or if you have open positions. They help our economy in ways that I just said. And of course, they help families and they help save lives. So these are win-win-win policies, which is why they're so popular, because people innately know that they are so important. It's so important to build a care infrastructure, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the economically smart thing to do.
So it's a complete no-brainer on every front. What are the obstacles? What is holding back from this incredible path? What are the obstacles that need to be deconstructed? Is there a vestigial misogyny somewhere in there which says, actually, we don't want women to go off to work, we want women at home?
The United States of America certainly has vestigial misogyny, or also known as active, alive, and well misogyny. I mean, it's horrible. I'm laughing so you don't cry. But you can look at what's happening right now. with our access to reproductive health care, which is incredibly regressive in the United States of America right now. It is awful. We just had Roe v. Wade overturned, turning the power to the states, and now in multiple states, access to reproductive health care and abortion care is completely restricted, which is not okay, because it really should not be a politician's decision about what people do with their bodies. This should be a person's decision. And if anyone's involved, it should be their doctor, not their elected leader, right? So this is a really big deal. And it's sort of a tipping point about our culture, because when you look at who's needing abortion care in America, 6 out of 10 people who need and have abortions are actually already moms. And when you find out what's happening, part of what's happening is that having a child in America is so incredibly expensive. You get the mom penalty in your job and in your pay. And, you know, it's a ridiculous situation. Also, those very same groups, far right conservative groups, are going after birth control, which is mind-blowingly awful, because being able to decide if, when, and how many children we have is a primary, fundamental, necessary freedom for all people. So, do we have a problem with misogyny and racism in America? Yes. Do we have a country that is not all on board with that? Yes. In the 2022 elections, we saw, and good news, every place that restricting abortion care was on the ballot, they lost. Every place that advancing access to abortion care was on the ballot, they won. That's red states, blue states, purple states, which are somewhere in between. We know that the people are on the side of actual real freedom, bodily autonomy, being able to be free to have that care infrastructure, right? So what we have is a very vocal minority of far-right extremists who are really causing harm by stacking courts over time and putting forward restrictive policies. But we know the voters and the people of all political parties are actually for sanity and a care infrastructure and reproductive justice.
Talking of the political situation, Trump is obviously there waiting in the wings. How concerned are you about the next presidential campaign and simply having Trump campaigning?
Yes, I'm very concerned about Trump, period. Right now, we are in a situation where, because former President Donald Trump appointed a judge in Texas, far-right extremists have gone after one of the medications that has been proven to be just as safe as Tylenol, Mifa, and said that the FDA can no longer prescribe it. Now, this is a small court with a justice that Donald Trump actually appointed in Texas. But if this ruling happens and the FDA...
Hang on one sec, because I think that our internet across the Atlantic just glitched slightly. So there is this medication as harmless as Tylenol. That's where I got to, and then I lost you. So for those who also lost you.
Okay, mifepristone, also known as Mifa, is the far-right extremists are suing in that particular judicial location where Donald Trump handpicked the judge to not allow the national FDA to have that particular medication be prescribed. Now, that medication is now prescribed in 54% of abortions in the United States of America, as well as for miscarriage care and many other healthcare needs. And so it's the only way that many people in many states have access to abortion and even miscarriage care right now. And so if that gets overturned in Texas, which is a place where, again, Donald Trump handpicked that judge, and people are handpicking, putting cases in front of that judge, it actually doesn't just impact Texas, which would be a tragedy in and of itself. It impacts the whole United States of America. So that case is going to be decided probably in the next days or weeks. So I'm worried, to your question about Donald Trump, what he has done already, the damage he's done already, and things like appointing justices who are now serving for a very, very long time. I'm also concerned about the fact that he really emboldened hate in America. Since Donald Trump arrived on the scene, hate crimes have gone up. We've seen a lot more regressive policies being pushed forward. And we've even seen what I call hate spaghetti, which is far-right extremists just throwing awful things that are hateful at the wall to see what sticks as a wedge issue between people, really to tear people apart, people against each other while they're doing something elsewhere. So that is not in our best interest. And so I'm concerned both about the past and the future of him continuing to embolden hate in the upcoming elections. It's not a good situation. Also, disinformation has just gone wild during his time in the public sphere. And it's very hard to combat disinformation with information because people remember the negative more than the positive.
Absolutely. And people are dismissive now of facts and experts and have other sources that they turn to. And we're seeing that increasingly in Europe and in Britain as well, with our whole Brexit vote, when people were persuaded to do something that was incredibly destructive to their country on the basis of misinformation.
Now, in the hope category, I always have to have some
please,
hope.
can we have some hope,
The
please?
hope category. In the United States of America, usually presidents have 2 terms. Donald Trump was a 1-term president. That means that what we're mostly seeing was a vocal minority doing that hate spaghetti and really advancing harm and emboldening increased hate and hate crimes. And so at Moms Rising, we had 78,000 people turn out to volunteer to help get out the vote in 2020. People are incredibly active in the positive category and powerful. So really, I think what kind of Donald Trump shows is, when you take your hand off the wheels of democracy and think somebody else is running the show, bad things can happen. I call him the malignant Cheeto. But when you pay attention, when you vote, when we all vote, good things can happen. We can have a more reflective democracy that respects the contributions and the needs of every person in America and the world, depending on where you are.
So what can those who are listening to you do, those sitting at home saying, yes, this is terrible, I don't want to allow this to happen, we need the change that you're talking about? What can individuals do?
Individuals are so powerful. I mean, one of the things that I've been honored and blessed and incredibly humbled to see over the years is just how powerful we are together. At Moms Rising, for example, we just in 2022, just to give you an idea of the power before I tell you how to do the power, because you need incentive. We just at the end of 2022 helped pass healthcare for all people who give birth for 1 year following birth. That's huge. We finally helped pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That's huge. We finally helped pass the Pump for Working Mothers Act. That's huge. And we finally helped pass mental health support for moms, also huge. And also we helped pass a 30% increase in funding for childcare, which was about $8 billion. That's huge. We don't have the full transformational change that we need. We still need affordable childcare for everyone that's high quality. We still need national paid family medical leave. We still need youth justice and family justice and immigration policy reform that's fair and just for all. So we have a long way to go. But what we do know is that when we do raise our voices, and I'll share with you how, so how can people take action? You can raise your voice. Call your member of Congress or get involved with an organization. It could be Moms Rising. It could be any organization that is speaking to your values.
And of course, we're talking here about women all over the globe because we have women from all over the world listening to this conversation. So this is all transferable to wherever you live.
Yes. So reach out to first, look around. Are there organizations that are speaking what's in your heart? And get involved with them. And the reason to get involved with the organization is because everybody's busy, and organizations, their job is to figure out when your voice can make the most difference and what's going on in terms of where are the fulcrum points for change, and then give you ways to bridge your voice into those fulcrum points for change so you don't have to do all the research. So there's that. But the next thing is share your story with your elected leaders. Your story could be anything, and everybody has a story. It should just be a little bit short, maybe a paragraph or two. But for example, healthcare. Everybody gets sick. and not everybody has a chance to get better. So you have a healthcare story. Either you got sick and you had access to healthcare coverage and then you were able to get better, or you got sick and you didn't have access to healthcare coverage. Both are stories. Similarly, paid family medical leave, either you had it or you didn't. Both are stories. All of the policy areas, there's both sides of the coin that are stories, either how it helped you to have these policies or hurt you to not have them. And so when you share your story with members of Congress, with your elected leaders, that really helps break through those stereotypes that people often have about what's happening and who is deserving of different policies. So really sharing your story is important. Also, making phone calls. You don't have to just share your story, but say like, vote yes on paid family medical leave, please, yesterday, or, any type of thing like that to your elected officials' offices. You won't talk to your elected official, you'll probably talk to a staff person, and they're usually really friendly and excited to hear from you. And that does add up. Sign on to those petitions. Organizations deliver those petitions. We just delivered petitions last week in DC. And it really helps get the point across that a lot of people are paying attention. And vote, people. Sign up. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make a plan to vote. And your plan should include your walk-up song. What song you're going to listen to as you get ready to vote. And also, can you bring 5 friends with you to vote? Voting is incredibly powerful. And if you want to go a step further, run for office or help somebody else who who would be great in office run too. So there's a lot of things we can do. But here's the important thing. I just gave a long list. I didn't even take a breath between all the things. It could be daunting. You don't have to do all of the things on the list. You can do one thing. Because the beauty of a movement is that if each person does one thing, then all those one things add up to a tsunami of change. Just do what you have time to do, what feels safe and comfortable for you to do, and build with you as you have time to do. But nobody can do it all. And that's part of the reason why organizations and movements are here. We all know nobody can do it all, and nobody can do it alone. So just doing one thing, even if it's just taking 5 seconds to sign a petition, that's being part of a movement for change. And it all truly adds up, which is why I started with the wins, because those wins happen because of all those tactics adding up over time.
Absolutely. And it also makes us realize that we have agency. When we act, we realize that we're not powerless, that we don't need to despair, that there are things that we can do. So that is a phenomenal list that you've just given us. Thank you. And as we draw to the end of this amazingly inspiring conversation, and thank you for the work that you and those that you work with do, I wanted to ask you about the role of compassion. At this time when there are so many divisions and organizations like yours are bringing together people from all sides of the political spectrum, how important is compassion?
Compassion is critical. Compassion is critical to humanity. It's not even critical to one political party or another, or to one organization or another. But having compassion for one another allows us to work and be and live in community. And we need to be in community in some way or another. Your community doesn't have to be 500 people. It can just be 2 people, but, we all in some way or another need each other. And without compassion, our ability to connect, to build change, really, really, really is hurt. And when I say build change, some people are like, oh, do you always need change? Well, we're always changing as a country, as a world, as different communities. Our technologies are changing. Our transportation is changing. All the types of things are changing. As those changes happen, it's the job of democracies to keep up with those changes so that we reflect the changes and the contributions and the needs of the communities who are living within those changes. If we were in a static time, that would be bad too. Change is not bad. But what is bad is if we kind of have outdated policies in a changed world, which is what we have right now, and we don't have democracies that reflect or respect the people who are living in them. And it takes compassion to be in that democracy and to be able to reflect and honestly to respect people as we get through all of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you to all of you at home who are listening. And don't forget to look at the work of Mums Rising. And if you haven't signed up to the Global Compassion Coalition, of which we're so thrilled to have Mums Rising as a coalition partner, please do. And look forward to seeing you all again soon. And Kristin, best of luck, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.